I stood in front of the Shah of Iran, the presidents of Indonesia, Ecuador, Panama, members of the Royal House of Saudi Arabia, and I've said something like, in this hand, I have millions of dollars for you and your friends if you play our game. In this hand, I have a gun in case you decide not to. Now, my words were more diplomatic than that, but that was the message. I was an economic hitman. I was given a job as an economist at an international consulting firm in Boston with close ties to the NSA and the CIA. I would go to countries with resources our corporations covet, like oil. I'd arrange a huge loan to those countries from the World Bank or its sister organizations, but the money wouldn't actually go to the country. It would go to our corporations, Bechtel, Halliburton, Brown and Root, familiar names, to build big infrastructure projects in those countries and incidentally make huge profits in the process. They'd build power plants and industrial parks, things that would benefit a few wealthy families in the country, the ones that own the industries. But the majority of the people would suffer. They would be left holding a huge debt they couldn't repay. So we'd go back and say, since you can't pay your debt, sell your resource, oil or whatever, real cheap to our corporations. Privatize. Sell your utilities, your schools, your jails, everything like that to our corporations. And Claudine also told me that if the leaders of these countries refused my offer, people she called jackals would be right behind me. I didn't actually carry a gun, but the jackals did.
All the things that Tinubu has done so far, all of them indicates that Tinubu is starting on a wrong foot. Is starting on a wrong foot, and I'll tell you why. The Western powers, led by America, followed closely by the UK and the EU, they have a strategy. And their strategy, I call it the colonial virus disease, mutation 3. That strategy is targeted at keeping us dependent on them. That strategy of the US through the IMF and the World Bank is targeted at making sure that African countries, inclusive of Nigeria, are dependent on the West, on the Europeans for goods. The strategy is targeted at making us consumers rather than producers, making us remain in consumption rather than moving us to production. That is their strategy. And to bring about that strategy, they need 3 things from us. 1, they want us to devalue our naira so that they can spend less dollar to buy over more things from us. That's 1. They want us to devalue our naira. 2, they want us to increase the pump price of fuel. And the excuse to do that is removal of fuel subsidy. They need that. That's number 2. Number 3, they need us to privatize. Now, each of these 3 things, Tinubu has served them on a platter of gold. What could Tinubu have done? Tinubu could have opened the veil and looked into the fraud that was called subsidy and made those people who have been fraudulently defrauding Nigeria for the past years to pay back what they have stolen and recover those monies that he can use to activate Ajaokuta Steel, activate Alaja Steel, set Nigeria rolling on the path to industrialization, create minimum of 10 million jobs without the need to increase the pump price of fuel.
My first assignment was in Indonesia, a country that had just ended a terrible civil war where more than 1 million people had been killed. I just knew that I was expected to produce a report that would convince the Indonesian government to build an extremely expensive electrical system, hiring our corporations to do it. Fortunately for me, the winner of the Civil War, President Suharto, who was actually a dictator, wanted the projects that I was offering. And he also wanted CIA and Pentagon protection. And so every time I stumbled, and I stumbled often, somebody was there to pick me up. A government official would appear with an incredible report that would indicate beyond any shadow of a doubt that electricity was all the country needed to take off to huge growth. A Harvard-trained mathematician showed up with a mathematical formula that proved that if they just built this electrical system, everything would be fine. In the end, I produced a report that forecasts the need for electricity at an unheard of annual rate of 19%. Indonesia got its loan. Our corporations made lots of money. And I was promoted from economist to chief economist. It was quite a lesson. At that time, the Cold War was just really, really revving up. And Washington believed that Cuba was about to spread communism throughout the hemisphere. The CIA developed a program called Operation Condor to support right-wing dictatorships in Brazil, Argentina, Chile, throughout the continent. Jaime Roldos, president of Ecuador, democratically elected, and Omar Torrijos, head of state of Panama, strongly opposed Operation Condor. I was sent down to get them to change their ways. They wouldn't. They refused. Roldos was killed when his private plane crashed in what many believe was not an accident. Torrijos said, if CIA killed my friend Jaime, I'll probably be next. In less than 3 months, he died when his private plane crashed under very similar circumstances. You're going to hear after the break from a Marine Corps general who was in Panama at the time, and he agrees with me that these were probably, at least Torrijos was probably assassination. And I want to say that I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I don't believe in some overarching conspiracy to take over the world. But I do read reports. I think I'm a conspiracy factualist. You know, I read just recently declassified information, the CIA's own website, where they admit that the US government was deeply involved in the overthrow or assassination of Prime Minister Mossadegh of Iran, President Allende of Chile, Arbenz of Guatemala, Diem of Vietnam, Lumumba of the Congo. And speaking of Allende of Chile, he was replaced by the terribly brutal dictator, General Pinochet, who was a great defender of Operation Condor and also oversaw the murder of tens of thousands of his people, and was praised by Secretary of State Henry Kissinger as a great defender of capitalism. I believe in national security, and I don't believe that US security is served. I believe it's jeopardized when our agencies overthrow or assassinate the leaders of other countries because they don't follow our policies.
Now, many people argue that, the fuel of Nigeria is cheaper than that of our neighbors. That is encouraging smuggling. Hello? Nigeria is not the cheapest seller of fuel in Africa. Egypt sells fuel cheaper than us. Angola sells fuel cheaper than us. Libya sells fuel cheaper than us. Even Algeria sells fuel cheaper than us. And they are not so far from Nigeria. So if those countries sell fuel cheaper than Nigeria, how come their petrol is not being smuggled from their country into Nigeria? How come? How come they don't have problems of their petrol being smuggled out to their neighboring countries? How come it is only Nigeria? Despite the fact that Buhari's administration claimed to have spent 50 billion naira on software to track fuel tankers. That software, we did not see its implementation, and we did not see the money. So when the subsidy thing came, many people did not know that that fuel subsidy removal that is actually increase in the pump price of fuel was meant to favor Dangote refineries. And there are people who argue that Dangote refineries will create jobs. Really? Okay, let's say Dangote refineries creates 100,000 jobs. Do you know how many jobs that Dangote refinery will kill? And I'm not the only one saying it now. Millions of jobs. At the end of the day, who will it favor? All the steel that you require to manufacture refineries, they come from outside. So we will still be dependent on the West, and at the same time paying through our nose for fuel that we could produce locally. So the first subsidy removal is the number 2 item that Tinubu gave to these Western countries, these Western powers, on a platter of gold, rather than choosing the part that will favor Nigerians. Now, the third one is the devaluation of the naira. No country that is not a producing nation devalues their naira. Look, America has grouse with China. America has grouse with Japan. Do you know why? Because China devalued their currency against the dollar. Japan devalued their currency against the dollar. Why? Because they produce. And what does that mean? It makes them more competitive than America. So the jobs were going from America to China, going from America to Japan. And America didn't want that. So America was complaining that China was illegally devaluing their naira. We are not a producing country. They are angry that China is devaluing their currency. Japan is devaluing their currency. Meanwhile, they are encouraging us to devalue our currency. Ask yourself why. It is because they stand to benefit, because they know that we are a consumption economy, not a production economy, because they know that that way they can keep Nigeria dependent on them. And then, of course, the cost of living will increase. The condition of living will reduce. They are happy. Their corporations get to gain, and we get to suffer.